And how do you think the human genome is affected by sound frequencies?
Completely affected. In terms of the human genome is connected to a frequency band of information. We really can connect to harmonic intelligence, we can say, via our own genome. And DNA is both expressed vibrationally and affected by vibration. This again connects to scalar energy potentiality, and really our DNA is played like music. And we can think of ourselves as real energetic and musical orchestras, because the way that our DNA is expressed is through the language of frequency and resonance. So if we want to change our genomic expression, we need to change the way that we physically synthesize and play our DNA. And there are some incredible scientists that have done work on this. One of my most favorite fields to examine is the field of linguistic wave genetics. There was a Russian scientist named Peter Garyaev who looked into specifically how we can change the transcription of DNA factors by allowing ourselves to experience frequency differently. And he physically did some experiments which were so profound in nature when he would scan actually people's photographs and produce a white noise, a kind of frequency, which was then audible to the human, connecting them to their healthy selves. So imagine taking a photograph of a young person, scanning that through a machine that picks up the frequency information connected to that actual photograph, and then beaming that back to the individual to allow their DNA to recall the memory of who they were prior to the manifestation of their physical chronic conditions, disease factors, or anything else that's leading to their now more, unhealed version of self. Why is this possible? So essentially, this brings us to the space of morphogenetic physics. And this is a really complex field to move into because it looks at the understanding of the human as part of a holographic field of information, where we actually have a morphic field surrounding the self. That morphic field holds the information vibrationally that allows for the physical transcription of the genes, that allows us to express ourselves. It holds the memory and the operating system for the physical being expression. And so think of it, if we were to experience ourselves now in an unhealed state, that means that something went awry between the connection of our morphic field and the physical self, where when we're born, our cells somehow know how to express themselves. There is that program which is allowing for healthy human functioning. If we connect back to that morphic field, which requires being in a certain harmonic range of coherence, then we can experience ourselves in that healthy state. And so there are now scalar technology, scalar energy, plasma technologies, and different sound healing modalities, which allow us to come into a state of coherence by vibrationally reconnecting with our own morphic fields. And so everybody has a different kind of a song that their DNA plays. And so I believe that we will be moving into a time in the future when we can physically use healing tracks, potentially even music orchestrated for the body's genomic code, which will allow for healthy functioning of the cells, purely individualized based on the program that you individually express as a human being, which is something connected to your own holographic blueprint. And your DNA and your genome actually expresses itself as the music of prime numbers. So this gets into a very complex field of understanding, actually. How can this DNA potential be expressed as part of the binary code and part of a complex system of understanding how everything connects to a frequency, to a musical note, to a number. And that complex patterning allows for the transcription of a healthy genome. So this is obviously a rabbit hole to go down, but it's one that I think is a very promising field as we step into this holistic space in the future and explore more about the connection between energy, vibrational phenomena, and the human organism. Because really, there's no junk DNA as in terms of there are like random aspects of the DNA template which don't provide any functioning for the human. The junk DNA that we typically associate as being unnecessary is just unexplored potential. This is matter that needs to be decoded into unexpressed human potentiality. I think as we move more into the space of understanding the deep connection between vibrational phenomena and the human self, we can unlock certain dormant DNA possibilities, which just intuitively I feel connects to ESP, extrasensory perception, and different higher strand DNA potentiality, which might be just unexpressed aspects of our genomic code. And so perhaps when we are going through the ascension process, unlocking this DNA potential, that's exactly what we're tapping into. Different dormant areas in our DNA code, which allows us to be experiencing ourselves in this more multidimensional way. So a very deep area to look into, but it's It's fascinating. And we're really just recalling this awareness because that's where it all began. That's what the pyramids connect to. That's what the initial sound healing chambers were all connected to, bringing the whole human into a state of coherence and resonance, which allows for healing in the way that the body remembers how to heal symbiotically via consciousness expansion, as opposed to trying to heal distortion on the physical level, because really consciousness is a top-down mechanism of integration as opposed to bottom-up, which is the more reductionistic way that we look at it today.
And I want to honor you for leading in that area of healing, because I know that as we progress, we're going to need more people that are stepping in with that level of understanding to create the new systems of healthcare, to create the new systems of education. So just honoring you first and foremost for that understanding. And one of the last things I wanted to get into in this beautiful mystical conversation is you said you love the term omnism, which is seeing the truth of all religions. And where do you think that lies? Where is that center point that connects Christianity, Buddhism, all Hinduism, all the religions that we see out in the world? Of course, they hold deep, deep level of truths. Where do they all connect?
To me, omnism even sounds like it's talking about the oneness of the whole organism. It's considering that consciousness is like one living, breathing being, which I can think of the universe being like one living, breathing organism that contains all of these smaller units of consciousness, all corresponding, all interacting to create an experience that gives rise to unity consciousness. To me, omnism is the most integrative attempt to explain how every religious model, every ideology, every unique systemic framework that's ever been given rise to within the field of consciousness allows for this ultimate connection back to oneness. So omnism is really about experiencing unity consciousness at this level that incorporates and sees the truth in every individual perspective. That's really the definition I would give to truth. It's the sum of all individual truths. It's taking every perspective and seeing that it really is an irrevocable part of the one. And so that's how we as an individual unit of consciousness can start to see ourselves as a loving observer of the whole. Religions to this day still maintain a very separatist approach. They're ruled by the desire to create superiority or supremacy in terms of one belief system is above the others, typically, even if it's just identifying that source is one deity or one kind of expression of the one. That attaches, I think, unnecessary labels and identifiers to something that is ethereal and all about beingness. There can be no labels attributed to consciousness because it's quite literally a sea of awareness. And so I think omnism, where this can be expanded in the future to even include people that are perceiving truth in all the religions, truth in all of these systems that have ever been given birth to in consciousness, is as a system that is ruled by the science of consciousness. To me, omnism is an attempt to merge science and spirituality because it's not just spiritual in nature, where even spirituality has often a kind of extremist orientation. That's usually implying one end of the spectrum. Meanwhile, scientism is the extreme other end of the spectrum, which kind of also is a religion if we think about it, where scientism is so reductionistic that it's anti-holism. It's just looking at the view of reality on a very fundamental and kind of small scale level, which is very narrow-minded. That's why so many people that are attached to scientism are even atheists. They don't believe in God or a source because they're so focused on the mind as being really the God in reality. And that too is so limited in nature. So whether we're too extreme in the spiritual land and we exclude science altogether, or we're too extreme in the spiritual domain or in the scientific domain, then we're both excluding the real art of integration. And so that's where omnism gains a very balanced and grounded feel. It's if we can see that spirituality is something that needs to be grounded in nature. That's where we experience the whole self as being no different from any other self in existence. We can see ourselves as quite literally one unit of consciousness, one smaller scale representation of the macrocosmic whole. And that's where the cosmic identity can really be seated in every single person, to the extent that we can see that actually observation or perception is consciousness, whether it's the perception of an animal or an organism, or the perception of maybe a tree, or the perception of another human being that is entirely different from you. That perspective is a lens of consciousness, which means that is a lens of the creator. That is the creation and creator enmeshed in one organism. So omnism to me just has a feel of unification to such a profound extent that it does not exclude any one thing, because there isn't separation from that lens. It's something so holistic and all-encompassing that it allows us to see everything as a facet, like one larger structure that gives rise to a multifractal experience of oneness on every scale of reality. So I encourage everybody to think about how can they encompass this kind of all-encompassing perspective, which is really the experience of love. It's the experience of the dance of the divine masculine and feminine within the self. It's taking both into the integrative state of being enmeshed in reality, finding intimacy in your own self,